Welcome back to the channel, everyone. So today we're going to take a look at the brand new Sony Alpha 9 III with the global shutter, which gives us the opportunity to sync at any speed, even up to 1/80,000th of a second. But what I want to know is how that relates to using studio strobes and multiple studio strobes like I like to use in my commercial setups. So what we're going to do is we're going to set this camera up, we're going to take some exposures, looking at this array of lights that I have. And I've got these lights set at different powers, from power 9 on this end to power 2 on this end. And as we increase the shutter speed on this camera, I want to see what changes with the relationship of the power on the strobes here and the ever-increasing shutter speed here, and how that affects the power on this end of the studio strobes when the opportunity of time gets slighter and slighter as we speed up the flash here. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at the results as they come out of the camera right on the computer. Alright, so I thought I would break this video up into a couple of parts, and I'll have everything kind of chaptered out on the timeline down below so you can jump around if you'd like. Thought we would start by looking at the A9 III body itself, briefly talk about global shutter and how it compares to the previous generations of mirrorless cameras, and then take a look at the results on the computer from my little 8 strobe setup in that array over there, and how the different strobe powers relate to the ever-changing, ever-increasing shutter speed on this camera, and how that works when they sync together or doesn't work, and then how we can adjust with the flash timing settings inside the A9 III. But let's just talk about, we'll start with the body here, and I just want to say that this is the most comfortable Sony body that I've ever held. I just want to give a shout out to Sony for ever evolving their grips here. Even the last one, the A7R5 that I picked up, one of their more recent models here, has a nice grip on it, and this one's an improvement over that one. So you can tell Sony's hard at work increasing the comfort level of holding these cameras, and for someone like me who rarely uses a tripod on set, that's a very important factor, and this camera is just a joy to hold with this grip it's got. I also want to point out that it's got the best rear screen mechanism that's out there right now, where you can pull the screen out from the body, rotate it out and get this full articulation. This allows me, when I'm shooting tethered on set, to bring my cable out here and still rotate this screen fully, which helps me when I'm down low and trying to get some lower angle type images, and it gives me the ability to see the full screen versus when that screen is up against the body, and when I try to rotate it, it'll hit the cable as it comes out here. And I demonstrated that when I used this A7R5 in a shoot a little while back, and I'll take that one, put that video up here in case y'all want to watch that one. So let's go from there, and also let me just point out too, you got some dials here on top that where you can control your drive mode, which is super important with this camera because it can shoot pretty fast, and as well as that, you've got access to your focus modes here, continuous, manual, single, all that kind of good stuff right here, which for me is nice to have. I can quickly glance down, see where I'm set while I'm shooting, and can change things if I need to. There are other customizable buttons all over this thing. It's built like a tank, and you're not going to be disappointed with this body. So from there, let's talk about the, I guess, first gen technology when it comes to the global shutter that is in this camera. And I'm going to make it brief because I did another video, which I'll link up here too, about the global shutters, and Sony's got videos talking about the difference between global and your older rolling progressive scan type shutters. And what this allows us to do is, with strobes, for instance, we can sync at any speed. Obviously it can be based on your strobes, and we'll talk about some of this here coming up in the video. But it allows us to avoid the rolling shutter issues that we would have with these other cameras that have a maximum sync speed. Like with the Canon R5 here, a 200th of a second is as high as I can go while using my strobes when I'm not in a high-speed sync type setup, which when I'm using multiple strobes, I'm set to manual and I have to stick at a 200th. And the benefits of the global in comparison to that are if I need to control the ambient, or if I'm in a setup where the ambient is really bright and I'm wanting to capture some action type shots in front of my camera using the strobes, based off that ambient level and the action that I'm doing, the speed of that action, I can have some ghosting because I'm relying on the flash duration of my strobes. A lot of people ask me, how do you freeze action at a 200th of a second? And I am strictly relying on my strobes at that point. But having a global shutter, I'm able to, which means that the sensor reads everything at one time. And so you don't have, with the progressive, these older cameras, the top of the sensor is reading fractions of a second quicker than the bottom part. So you can have some weird stuff going on based off of what kind of action you're doing. Obviously, the faster the action, the harder it is for these older style, and I say older, and kind of put that in parentheses, but these other styles, non-global shutter sensors, it just is based off their readout speed. But you can get some warping on based off of whatever the action is, like swinging bats and stuff like that, golf clubs. You can get some bending and that type of thing with these non-global shutters. So that alleviates that. It also just allows me to sync basically wherever I want to at a certain level, and that's what we'll talk about here next. Let's quickly talk about the drawbacks, I guess, with this being an initial release, Gen 1, I guess you'd say, of a global shutter in a body like this. First of all, it's going to be costly. So this body here costs right around $6,000, and you can get two of these. You get both of these cameras for the price of one of these at the moment. Also, the resolution is not going to be as high as what you'll find in these cameras. The megapixel count is 24 point something, almost 25 megapixels, I guess, in this camera, which for, I guess, depending on use, that can be a drawback. But we've gotten spoiled here recently with these higher megapixel counts. But that is a consideration. You're going to not have the ability to crop in as far on the files that come out of this camera versus these two. I mean, this one's at 61 and this one's at 45. So that's a bit of a drawback. Base ISO, the base ISO on this camera is at 250. This one, I'm guessing it's 100. I can't remember off the top of my head, and it's 100 on this one. So it's a little bit higher than these other cameras. That doesn't really affect me as much because I'm bouncing my ISO usually from, I would say, probably 100 to 400. A lot of times I'm using it 400 to save power on my strobes. When I'm using batteries, that allows me to save the battery life on my strobes, or I'm using multiple strobes. So I will shoot it 400 to take a little bit of that stress off of my lights. So starting at 250 is no big deal here. Where that can probably come into play more often would be outdoors when you go out and you're wanting to shoot more wide open with the lens, and normally you would bring that ISO down, so you'll probably have to grab a ND filter to kind of swing that with this camera. Those are some trade-offs of having access, I guess, to this first generation global shutter that Sony's come out with. That being said, it is really neat to have a peek into the future. I feel like this technology will eventually trickle down through these other brands to these other bodies. I don't know how long that's going to take, but this camera right now is the only show in town that can do what it does. So we're going to jump into the computer in just a second and look at the results using this camera at all kinds of crazy shutter speeds with strobes on set. And I mean, the coolest part for me is just actually seeing the images come across at more than a 200th of a second like I'm used to using with the R5, and not catching the shutter and losing my frame as I go faster and faster. And that's when it kind of clicks or dawn with me that, hey, this is something special. This is something really different than what I've ever used in the past. So let's jump in and we'll take a look and talk about a little bit more about the global shutter and how we are trying to catch the flash within the parameters of our shutter from start to finish, and how that affects, I guess, and how the changing power of our strobes affects kind of where that lands and why we kind of have to chase that after a certain point. All right, so let's see if I can run us through here and this makes sense for what I was trying to do with those 8 strobes and how they're going to react to the increasing shutter speed with the A9III and its global shutter. All right, so this info is straight from the Sony support website. And on this graph right here, you'll see amount of flash on this A side. On the B side is our time on this graph. This right here is the arc of our strobe flash. You can see it starts and then peaks and then falls off. These red lines on either side, they are marking the shutter opening and the shutter closing. And so when we're at a 200th of a second or so, somewhere in that area, we easily capture the whole length of all of the light of the flash. And you can see that as it's shown right here. The main part of this strobe that we want to catch is the max up here at the peak. So as we start to speed up our shutter, these two red lines start to get closer and closer, and we're going to start catching less and less of our strobe flash here. Now let me say too that we're only looking really like at one strobe setting. As we change strobe powers, this little hill will change in its shape. So the lower the power of the strobe, the smaller this is going to be and the shorter it's going to be. The more power, at least on the FJ400s, the longer that flash duration is going to be. And you can see that on the strobe. It'll show you like 1/3000th of a second or however. And as long as you are within that realm of what it's saying it does with your shutter speed, you should be able to capture most, if not all, of that light. Based on the scale, because there are two different scales, there's a T5 and a T1. The T1, it covers more of this hill of the strobe, representing the strobe power, than the T5, so I would refer to the T1. That's a whole nother wormhole you can go down and leave that for a different time. But let's scroll down here. This is designating where we have our shutter speed so fast and that these lines are so close together that they're missing the light output out of the strobe completely. And that's where we have to start adjusting the flash timing by microseconds in the A9III. And there's a menu, there's a setting in here where you can adjust those from 0 to 10,000 on that microsecond scale, which then will change the timing of the shutter in regards to the flash. And so then you can, as you manually move these two lines across the spectrum, you can start picking up that strobe again, and you can see that here. And then where we want to go is where we can capture that peak of the strobe right in here in the minimum. And that is kind of the trick when you start going faster and faster with your shutter speeds. The trick is trying to line it up with the strobes, and so you get the maximum power that you can get at a certain shutter speed. And that's where we are right now with this technology. This is, basically something brand new with the global shutter, being able to exercise these fast shutter speeds. And the strobe companies, I think now, the ball has kind of in their court to where hopefully eventually they'll be able to come out with firmware, or it might be all new strobes. I'm not sure exactly what all it's going to take, but to where this camera through this remote can talk to the strobes, and they can automatically line up based off of your shutter speed and the power setting on the strobe. So I think that is to come down the line. Right now we're going to have to manually adjust as we go along, and that's kind of what you'll see here, and that's what they're showing on these different graphs here. And I'll leave links to the Sony site down below. This kind of shows the results from that, where if you're missing it, you're not going to get any power. If you're kind of hitting it, you get it here, and then if you get right on that max, you'll get a pretty good, nicely exposed image. But let's take a look. Actually, let me go back. Let me show you too, and in regards to the strobe company. So Westcott has done their own testing with this camera in their at their facility. They've got some settings here for in-camera, and then they have come out with a graph here with your flash power on this side on your FJ400, and then your shutter speeds on this end here. And so they have figured out the optimal settings in the flash timing setting in the A9III to set your camera at, depending on your shutter speed and your flash power. So you can see, and we're going to look at it here in just a second, that it all changes. When you change the power on your strobe, it's going to move around on this graph. When you change the shutter speed here on your camera, it's going to bounce around. Let's just look on here. And this is what I've set up. I've got the 8 strobes here. I've got them set, like I said, at all different powers. I've got this one here is at a 9, and we go 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, and 2. And so as we'll scroll through, as I start speeding up the shutter, we'll see the effects right here looking at these strobes. And as I mentioned, the lower the power here, the shorter the strobe hill is on that graph. And so at a certain point, it's going to be easy to miss all the power on these lower end strobes than it is, when you've got the larger kind of bell curve on these here. So let's go down. So I started at a 250th of a second. This is 400th of a second to 800 to 1,000. So and in my mind, everything's looking, really, it's looking all right, pretty much to this point. And then we have a pretty good decrease at 1250th of a second. And then this is 16 thousandths of a second. And then we lose the lower end power strobes, the 2 and the 3, completely at 2 thousandths of a second. So at this point, what I did is I went into the camera, adjusted the timing, the flash timing, and I set it from 0 to 580. And I didn't have this graph before, and the Westcott graph has come out since I did this kind of setup here. And so what I did is I went in and adjusted that setting, and you can see the results here. So this is back, and I backed it up at 1250th of a second. And then this, I'll show you, these are the 2 frames at 1250th of a second. And so you can see at a 0 on the scale, the flash timing scale, I'm not getting as much power here as I'm getting here when I've adjusted it forward to 580 in this case. And so then what I did is just kept it at 580. But you could see the difference. Let me pull that back up again. You can see a clear difference that once I adjusted it, now I'm getting more power at the same shutter speed than I was getting earlier. And so that tells me that I can adjust up to at least 1250th of a second and still feel good about the power output that I'm getting from my strobes, and I've achieved a higher shutter speed than I normally would be able to. And let me go down, let's see, so there we go to 1/16,000th, 1/2000th of a second, and then 1/2500. And so right about here is when I'm going to probably need to have to adjust again. And now what I would do is I would go consult that graph and see kind of what I would need to do. And this is another adjustment from the 4000. Let me look at my little sheet here. So we're up to like 720 on this one, and just kind of dialing around in this setting to find where I'm getting more power out of those strobes and moving them around. So like I said, it's going to be one of those things we're going to have to kind of play around with, figure out what's working. And then for fun, let's just go down and we can run all the way up to our max shutter speed. These are at 20 thousandths of a second, and here's at 80 thousandths of a second. So, and I didn't do really any more adjusting on this. I was just kind of, just for fun, wanted to see my camera, or this camera, sync up with strobes at 80 thousandths of a second. I would, now that the graph is out from Westcott, I can go back in, adjust, and then try and get, based off of what power setting I want to use for a setup, I would adjust the flash timing in here to pair up with the 80 thousandth of a second shutter speed. And let me just say too, like at Imaging USA, when Sony was first kind of showing this camera off, and they were using the FJ400s in their booth there, and they were syncing at 1/20,000th of a second and getting great results. I have a little behind the scenes, or a little clip from there. Had I known I was going to be making this video, I would have filmed more extensively, but that's kind of what I got from the show there. Well, I hope this video makes sense. All this technical stuff kind of blows my mind here, but I do feel like we are playing around with some new age tech, and it's going to be now up to the strobe companies to figure out how to work with these global shutters, and hopefully one day we will be able to just use our remotes, plug them on the camera can talk to the remote talk to the lights, and like I said, everything will sync up without us having to do all these manual adjustments, and still give us access to the global shutter and all the benefits that provides for us as photographers. I do want to say too, in conjunction with the camera here, for these tests I was using the 2.8 24-70 G Master 2 lens. I know there's some lenses that aren't compatible up to 80 thousandths of a second. And then to trigger the strobes, I was using the FJ X3S. And so that's what I was using here to achieve the 80 thousandth of a second shutter speed. And I'm hoping to put this guy to use now that I have this information just kind of in my head, and now that Westcott has come out with that graph, I feel a lot more comfortable taking this up to higher shutter speeds on a set, and that's kind of what I'm hoping I'm going to be able to do for y'all here in the near future, and kind of show some real world applications with this camera. But I think that's going to have to do it for today. My mind is swimming with all this technical jargon here. But if you felt like this video is worthy, please give it that thumbs up. If you want to see more content just like this in the future, hit that subscribe button down there and the little bell so YouTube will let you know when I'm back on here. In the meantime, you can find me on social media at quantzphoto on Instagram and ProLight Mods over there on Instagram. Y'all please stay safe and healthy out there, and I hope to see y'all again soon in the next one.